Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Now, historic films made in the spring of 1948 and just released show Eniwetok preparing for heavily guarded and still largely secret tests of new atomic weapons. The test's purpose is to measure atomic effects on thousands of different materials, 30,000 tons of them, not, as at Bikini, to prove military effectiveness.
San Francisco police say that 9 persons have been arrested in a narcotics raid on the headquarters of the Grateful Dead, a widely popular singing group. 2 members of the group, Rod McKernan and Robert Weir, and their business manager, Danny Rifkin, have been booked on suspicion of possessing narcotics.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower cleared.
We got a roll program. Neil Armstrong reporting the roll and pitch program, which puts Apollo 11 on a proper heading.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, strange lights are causing a viral buzz on YouTube. Could we have caught extraterrestrial activity on a recent newscast? Brandon Arroyo investigates.
As the newscast ended, the controversy began back on September 26th. What is that light shining in the back of the dark night sky?
With coverage reaching all the way back to 1948, for over 70 years, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Now, Fate Magazine Radio is carrying on that tradition of setting the standard in paranormal talk radio as we report and discuss some of the most mysterious and perplexing phenomena imaginable in this strange world of ours. Now, here is your host of Fate Magazine Radio, Kat Hobson.
Good evening. Welcome to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and I'm so glad that you're here. My guest tonight is someone that I admire greatly. We are friends. This is not our first go-round. We've interviewed several times in the past, and every time it just gets to be more and more interesting and more fun. Robert Lyndsy Milne is a psychic intuitive counselor. He's a teacher and healer, and he's a life coach. And he shares information on his psychic life. He helps people through his gifts, and he's my friend. I think that you're going to love his work with a coma patient. He is really just so intuitive with every aspect of life. And he's also been featured in a book, The Perfect Predator, relevant to being able to help cure a very deadly superbug infection. So he is the full package. We are so fortunate to have him here. And Lyndsy, thank you for being here and joining me.
I am absolutely delighted to be talking with you again, Kat. I think this is our 4th visit.
I believe it is.
between visits, I often watch parts of your podcast and follow you. So, you're not out of my mind, and there's just gaps in time,
Yes.
then we catch up.
And I love when we get to, because you are one busy man. You've started a podcast.
I have. It's called My Side of the Crystal Ball. It's really wonderful. I'm an overnight success after 57 years.
I love that.
Yeah. I turned 58. I'll celebrate 58 years of being a professional psychic come January. And I'm 73 years old now. And I was supposed to be semi-retired, but, I have my own podcast now, My Side of the Crystal Ball. And I appear on about 35 or to 40 podcasts a year, as well as I have my psychic practice and my life coaching and all the other kind of stuff too. So it's wonderful to be alive.
Well, I'm glad that you are, because you're somebody I enjoy so much.
Thank you.
You've been, you didn't start out with an easy path. And
no,
you have just gone wide open and done very well. You started out living on the streets. That had to be very frightening. How old were you then?
The first time I was 14 and a half, and it was in the winter time, and I ran away from home about mid-November, and the police didn't catch me until the end of April of that year, and I was taken home, and when I turned 15 in the summer, I left home again, and I never lived with my family full time ever again, and I lived on the streets, and I was homeless for a while, and it was a fabulous experience. And when I think, you said that must have been frightening. I was never really frightened. I was more sad than frightened. And I don't remember feeling fear when I was on the streets. I could have, but do you know what? I felt less fear in an alleyway in the wintertime than I did when I lived at home with my biological family.
I can believe that.
It was much more fearful living there. And it was less violent on the streets than it was at home.
Understand that.
Yeah.
I don't discuss it much, but I too left home because of violence in the home.
Did you receive it?
I was the receiver. My sister was the primary receiver. And it was, so I really can relate to that. And there is, I don't really know how to describe it any better than you did. When you're away from the danger, and I was concerned because my sister was 7 years younger and couldn't escape the danger. No one would help her. And so I was trying to get help, but I couldn't stay in the environment because it was, you just never knew when it was going to be so bad that you had to fight back. And I was afraid that I might either get, dead or create a situation where someone else did. So that was not a good environment.
No. How did you get over your anger? And rage, or did you have that?
Oh, I had that in spades. It actually took me some time. I continued to have problems. As you well know, people sometimes react by not valuing themselves because they felt no one else did.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate that I had friends whose parents were aware of the situation and did what they could to help. And, you know, it's very frustrating. And for a long time, I tried to find ways to work as an advocate. And I had too much rage at the time still to help people understand that sometimes in a home environment is not the best place for a child.
Sometimes
regardless of whether the parents are always in, you know, a religious structure, you know, relationship with their church, or whether they are, you know, hidden raging alcoholics, or what the deal is. Sometimes you just have to get a child away from an environment. And nobody at that time really advocated that. I did go to my school counselor because my father, who was trying to help, was trying to trying to have ideas, and was going through things that worked in other environments, but it wasn't working with that one. You know, my school counselor was aghast that I went to them. You know, there were all kinds of people that just wouldn't help and didn't know how to help. So that's what I lived through. And when I was in my 40s, I think, I had learned to compensate for the rage and tried to bury the rage, and did a fair job. People thought I was just sweet and wonderful, and, you know, I did have a reputation for speaking.
Well, you
my
actually
mind.
are that.
I am.
But you're also the other side, too.
I am.
Right? That's what was going on.
It is.
You know? Yeah.
But my nephew was killed. I ran into a friend who was a counselor for, you know, a psychologist. And I said, how about if I come and talk to you sometime? He said, sure. I've talked to the rest of your family. Might as well talk to you. You know?
Yes.
So I did. I went to him and talked, you know, when I needed to. And when I didn't necessarily think I needed to. And a while later, he looked at me and he was just like, he literally told me one day, he said, how did you come from these people? And I said, well, I don't know. And I really sometimes wonder that myself, but I am me, and I am overcoming this, and I did. So at the end of the day, he told me one afternoon, he said, I think we're done. And I was just like, what? And he said, well, we're done. You have come to terms with things. You have adjusted. You have accepted. You have, you know, done your best to forgive. And sometimes you're as good as it's going to get, and there's never anything wrong with you. You just had to adjust to the things that happened to you.
Right.
And wrap your mind around them.
Of course. Right.
So I did. And I'm a firm advocate. And if they're listening, I have a friend who is struggling with not wanting to do, you know, talk therapy. And she is in crisis right now, and she needs it. And she knows that I love her. And I don't share this very often, but we do have similar backgrounds in a lot of ways, and gifts in a lot of ways. And so I think that if you can be an advocate for yourself, but also an advocate to help others, which is what I'm trying to do with my friend, because I can't do it for her. I just have to help her have confidence and strength. But, you know, you do what you're supposed to do, and you know it when you see it.
Yes.
And because I had actually thought a time or two about calling you for a session, just booking a session.
Oh, you should have.
Well, I probably still will. But, yeah, and for people that don't know, your website is Robert Lyndsy, Lindsy, Milne, Milne.com. And you can go there and learn about him and learn all the things that he can do to help you and help you help yourself and just help you have confidence and know with guidance your strengths. And he's a life coach. He can help you with all kinds of things. So look at you getting this turned around. I can tell you're doing a podcast now, little mister.
Yeah, it's called My Side of
Yes,
the Crystal Ball.
And you're good at drawing out now.
It's yeah, it's been more than a year.
Yes.
We've done 26 podcasts over the last year, and soon, and we also started, and I'm saying we because even though I'm the person that talks on the podcast, if it wasn't for the team around me, there would be no podcast, and that's the producer of my podcast, Michelle, and the editor of my podcast. She's going to hate me now because my brain just froze. Kayla, and she edits my podcast, and they tolerate, me struggling with TikTok, and that's, but I'm getting there. So if it wasn't for them, there would be no My Side of the Crystal Ball, at least not being broadcast. But each podcast is better than the last.
Absolutely.
And I learned something new in each podcast. And with one exception, every guest that I've had on so far, I've had a really close, deep, warm, personal connection. And a lot of them we touch at a very deep level. And several times, both myself and my guests get teary-eyed about what we're talking about. And that really is so special.
It is so special. It would be easy because I do like and trust you, right? And I know that other people who know and speak with you, but I've had time to get to know you. I know that every time we speak, you're the same person. You don't put on airs. You don't do anything that I would consider sketchy in the least. You're just a great person. And so I'm comfortable speaking with you.
Well, thank you, Kat. I'm touched.
It took 4 years for us to get to this similarity that we have, but it still happens because you're very good. You're just a very good person to talk to. And I know that your shows are very emotional at times because I pop in and listen.
Oh, have you? That's great. Thank you.
Yes. Well, absolutely. But, I think that you have definitely found something that you're good at. And I'm glad that Michelle, and we are, speaking of just one of the nicest people on the planet, right?
Yes. That's right.
Yeah. Michelle Freed is somebody who is very special. She's a publicist. She has a business called Leave It to Michelle. She is a producer for several shows. She is always in there, and she filled in for one of her guests that she had booked with me who couldn't come, and I learned how wonderful she is. I already knew, but I found out details. So, it's nice when you can be surrounded by people who care and support you. And you are. But we actually have to go to break because it's 20 minutes after the hour right at it.
Wow.
I know, right? So we're going to go and take this break, and we'll be right back. And I'm going to let you find out, my gosh, so many things about Robert Lyndsy Milne. You're going to enjoy him as much as I do. We'll see you on the flip side.
Warning, The following message does not necessarily reflect the views of WBHM-DB or its hosts, guests, listeners, or of any functioning adult in general. In fact, Frank should probably seek professional help. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi there, Frank Lee here. I thought that I would spend a few moments telling you about the positivity from the network here. The overall message of para-unity and happiness, and how everyone here wants to get along with everyone out there, and how everything is just wonderful. Wait, Cat's not looking. Okay, I've got something to really tell you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what's really going on. Honestly, all that being nice and positive crap was kind of hurting my soul, as dark as it is. So, what's really happening? You see it all the time. Everybody and their brother out there has a paranormal team because they watched a couple of episodes of Ghost Hunters or some crap like that. So they go and they spend half their mortgage payment on tools and things that light up that they don't understand. And then the next logical step, after buying matching black t-shirts and posing like 90s rappers for their Facebook page, is to, of course, have their own podcast. Well, you know what? You're not going to find that crap here. What we have here at WBHM Digital Broadcasting is the best host, the best guest, bringing you real information. All of the hosts here on this network know their stuff. They are the people who have been out there doing the work, doing actual research. And no, by research, I don't mean binge watching some kind of cheesy TV show on Netflix. I mean reading books. I mean out in the field doing the legwork. And who are they interviewing on their shows? They're bringing you the people they have learned from. They're bringing you the best in the field, covering all kinds of topics, from UFOs and aliens to Bigfoot to cryptozoology to ghosts to anything you can think of, a bit strange and unexplained. It is here, and you're going to get the best information here. So stay tuned to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Don't go anywhere. Speaking of going somewhere, I've got to go before my mic gets cut. We'll see you there on WBHM-DB.
Hello there. Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine, and I am Kat Hobson, your host. I'm so glad you're here. My guest tonight is Robert Lyndsy Milne, and he's just wonderful. And as you can tell by our previous segment, he has become an excellent interviewer because he's opening lines and bringing questions out from me, and with things that I don't generally share. And I'm okay with that because he is my friend, and we are safe with each other like that. So, I've got all this information about you. This is our fourth interview, I believe we decided. Yes. And, you left home, you were living on the streets, but Did you know, at what point did you know you were psychic?
Oh, did I know the word that I was psychic or that I was doing it?
That you were doing it.
I knew for sure when I was about 9 years old. And have you ever heard that story?
I'm going to say that I have, but I know we have new listeners who may not have.
Okay. Well, first of all, so when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I was either in kindergarten or grade 1, and we came home from school in those days for lunch. Anyway, when I came home, I said to my mother, Grandma Harris died today. Now, Grandma Harris was my great-grandmother, and she lived in England. and we lived in Toronto. I saw her once, but that was all. And we're talking about 1956, early in time. And my mother got angry with me, yelled at me, and spanked me for saying bad things. The next night at dinner, because in those days news traveled slowly, unless you were psychic, we were sitting around the table, my mother, my father. Now, my mother and father were children when they got married and when I was born. But there was myself, my sister and I, my younger sister and I, and my mother and father. It's the next day, and my mother said to my father, Grandma Harris died yesterday. And I thought my dad was going to get angry with my mother, yell at her or hit her because she said bad things. To my astonishment, they talked about it. And I got hit for it the day before. I got hit a lot of times for, Uncle Harold, that wasn't Aunt Sally. Who was that? That one got me hit in the head.
I would think, yes.
Sure. Well, I didn't know. So those things were happening to me, and I was getting a little bit, in the horse world, when a horse gets head shy, it's because they're afraid of getting hit. Well, I was getting head shy, and one time my father took me to an NHL Stanley Cup semifinal game. And it was it was Boston and Toronto. The series was tied 1-1. We're playing in Toronto. The game that we were at, the game was tied at the end of 3 periods, so they went into overtime. And when the teams came on the ice for the first overtime period, just to have a stretch, the game hadn't started, I knew number 17 with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Gary Eman, was going to score, and the game didn't even start yet. And as time went on, I was getting more and more excited because I knew that Gary Eman was going to score. Anyway, the teams went to the bench, and as they're getting ready to drop the puck at center ice, at Maple Leaf Gardens, there were like 18,000 people in the building, and the lights in the whole building went down except for on the rink, and it was silent. And I couldn't hold in my feelings any longer, because in my mind, Gary Eman had scored. Not that he was going to. He had scored. And I jumped up and started screaming and cheering in this building filled with 18,000 people. And everybody turned and looked at me and my dad. And he said, put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, sit down. And I did. Referee dropped the puck, and the game started, and I just kind of looked around, and I realized that other people didn't see what I saw. And then, and by the way, Gary Eman wasn't even a first-string hockey player. He was a mediocre player in the best league in the world. And anyway, after second or third shift, he came on the ice, and a guy named Red Kelly passed the puck to him, and Eman tipped the puck in the net for the overtime goal, and they won the game. And
fun.
And the entire building erupted. I didn't, except for me, and I just looked around the building.
Well, you had already cheered.
And I saw all the other people cheering, and the lights flashing, the camera lights, on the cameras, and it was then that I knew I was different,
right?
And other people were different. So that's when I knew. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew I was different then. That's how it happened.
Well, that was pretty definitive.
It certainly was. Now, I didn't quite realize what I had, and my father, and to his dying day, which was a year ago, August, went to his death believing his only son is a fraud and a charlatan. He also said to me many times over my life that I'm the only guy he ever met that never had a job. So he didn't think too kindly of what I did or do, and he doesn't believe in any of it. So
he does now.
Well, maybe, eh? So anyway, so I'm around 9, and my sister Gail would have been 7, and we would get an allowance of 25 cents a week. And the first game I was talking about was on a Thursday night, and then the second game was on the Saturday, but we were just watching it on TV at night. My dad would give Gail and I a quarter each for our allowance on Saturdays, and we would go to the Fox Theater. And for 25 cents, you get into the movies. I think there were 2 full-length movies, 2 cartoons, and then a serial movie. And you could get a drink of Coke, a box of popcorn, and candy, 25 cents, right? So
sweet deal.
That Saturday morning, when it came time to get our allowance, my father was about to give me my allowance, and I said, Boston's going to win tonight. And he said the equivalent of, or that day's equivalent of, no way. And I said, I bet you a quarter they do. And he took my allowance back and he put it on the coffee table. And that night, I doubled my allowance. and I got so good at it that I had to let him win, because I was afraid he would catch on. And I did that for a few years and then realized that maybe I shouldn't be doing that. I stopped. But I hustled him for a couple of years and I did really good.
Only you would have hustled your dad.
Yeah.
Well, I love that.
Yeah, well, 9, 10 years old, I didn't understand what I was doing. I just knew that I knew that others didn't. So, that was what he never caught on.
Well, he didn't believe in it, so how could he?
Well, that's right. That's right. He never caught on. But I've never done that again.
Well, I have watched people who have the level of abilities that you do, who back in the day used them to hustle. And it was just like, oh my goodness, somebody is going to just kick your ever-loving behind. But
if
it was,
catch you, yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's really interesting. It's kind of like just knowing that, well, if I ever am starving, I can avoid that. But
well, funny that you should mention that. So when I was on the streets, at such a young age, I never once ever begged or did anything other than work to get food. I never ever begged or robbed or stole anything. Right. And I survived on the street by my instincts and my wits. And it was a training program. That was part of my training, but it was also, there were times like whenever I would get into trouble, and children on the street can get into trouble inadvertently.
Yes.
Whenever I was in trouble, I always had the option of either solving the problem using my intuition, psychic ability, or doing an illegal or an immoral act. There was no right or wrong. to what there was no right way to do it, but the choices I made affected how my life went. Okay, so there wasn't a right choice or a wrong choice, but what I decided to do had an impact on what I was, the level that I would be on.
Absolutely.
And almost all, and I didn't know that, I was just doing it. And almost always I chose the psychic way. I never chose the illegal, like stealing or things like that. There were a couple of snow blizzards and stuff that I had to do things, but other than that, I always used my psychic ability to survive and get by. And the people around me also survived as because of my ability to find places where the food was, or where we could work for something, to get work doing something to get food. I was never hungry on the street because I would go to a restaurant and say, can I work here for something to eat? And almost always they would get, do that. So that's how one of the ways I survived.
Well, that's actually, I think, and I know that in Depression era here, that was often the way things worked, was that, if you're hungry and you don't have a way to get food, then you go and you offer to work.
Absolutely.
For a meal. And, because you don't want to be, people didn't want to be what they considered freeloading or whatever. If you can work,
of course,
then that's what they did. And
there is honor in working. So,
absolutely.
If you go to a place and say, look, I'm hungry, can I work? Well, when you get fed, that's your pay.
Yes.
So you're not borrowing, or, you don't have to be ashamed. You earned it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it's really interesting because I see that a lot of times people are not willing to do that anymore. And I don't understand, it's, if I were a business owner and someone came up to me and said, I don't have transportation or, a real job, whatever, I cannot get, to a regular job, but I'm hungry and I'm more than willing to work if you can just feed me.
Yeah.
That's doing it with honor. That's taking care of yourself in a responsible way. And, I personally would hire someone who came to me and said that, because I would see their willingness to actually do what it took to take care of themselves, and I would honor that. But sometimes there's not a position, though.
Following that thought, being in the right place, finding where I could work. The way my life was in those days, and myself and a couple of friends, there was a place in Toronto, downtown, and it was called the Orange Spot. It was a hamburger joint, and there was a small front area, and then there was a large room in the back. And the owner, he worked there by himself, and he let the street kids hang out in the back, and he would let us do that. And one day, I saw him working in the front, and all the tables in the restaurant were dirty with the utensils and plates left by the customers, and it was getting busy. So I've always been an energetic kid or person, even now. So I wanted something to do. So I started cleaning all the tables. But we'd hang out in the Orange Spot until about 11 o'clock at night. And then at around 11, he would close. And then we'd walk to the bus station and hang out there for a few hours. Then we'd get kicked out of the bus station. And then we'd walk downtown to the train station and we'd hang out there for a couple hours. And then get kicked out there. Then we'd come back to the bus station and then to the orange spot when it opened. So the next day I came in, I saw the tables were dirty again, and I cleaned them. And he gave me a hamburger. And I started doing that regularly. And he started feeding me regularly. And then he asked me, could I cook hamburgers? And I said, oh, sure, I did that a lot. Never cooked one in my life. And anyway, he showed me how to cook hamburgers. So then I started cooking hamburgers in the place. And then helping cleaning up. And then my friends would leave and I would help more with the cleanup. And then I'd leave and he'd lock the door. He knew that I was homeless.
Right.
And he one day said to me, I know you don't have anywhere to sleep. You can sleep in the basement if you want, but I have to lock you in and you won't be able to get out. This was back in, now we're into the 60s, now we're in the 60s. And locks weren't necessarily able to be opened from the inside in those days. He said, well, anyway, when I lock you in, you won't be able to get out. And I said, okay, that's fine. And I started sleeping in the basement. And I would then get up early before he'd come in. I'd just start doing things around the restaurant. And he'd come in and then we'd start cooking. And after about, I think it would be a month or so, he told me that it wasn't, he said that he was worried if something could happen and I wouldn't be able to get out, like the place catching on fire or something. Right. He thought that it would be dangerous. So, the day before, he gave me some cash in the bank book and he said, would you make this deposit? And I did. And I came back. So the next day he said, that if if the place caught on fire or something, I wouldn't be able to get out. He gave me a key and said, this is how you can get out. And I started that night. I let my couple of friends come in and I cooked hamburgers for them and we all slept downstairs, and that went on for almost 2 months. So I looked after some of my friends too, and survived on the streets.
That's just astonishing.
And then I heard, because I knew what I was doing psychically.
Well,
I knew that. Yes.
Wait, because we have to go to break.
Okay.
But bring this when we come back.
Okay.
All right. So we will be right back. And thank y'all so much for being here. We'll see you on the flip side.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine, and I am Kat Hobson, your host, with my guest, Robert Lyndsy Milne. And Robert, I had to interrupt you.
Okay.
And you had just been bringing your friends and cooking burgers for them and keeping them safe too.
Yeah. And then I heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room in Toronto doing tea leaf and card readings, you would get paid. And so I was 15 and a half, and I phoned the tea room, and I spoke to the owner, Mrs. Cox, and I told her that I did readings. And, she said, can you do tea leaf readings and card readings? And I said, oh, of course I can. And she, said, well, come in and do a reading. That was, the interview for the job. Yes. And I had never read a tea leaf in my life. And I had no idea what cards meant. And so I had just so when she brought out the teacup and the cards and stuff, they even gave me the cards too. And I just held the cup in my hand, put it in front of my face, looked at her, and just did the usual reading I would have done. And then when I put the cards down on the table, I had no idea what they meant. But as I was giving her information, I was pointing to different cards saying, this is what this means. And I got hired. And that was January 17, 1965. And I started working at the Cozy Tea Room. And what if you worked there in the afternoon, you would get a cup of tea for yourself, right? A cup of tea, a sandwich, and some cookies, and you got paid at the end of the shift. And if you worked on the night shift, you got a hot meal, cup of tea, cookies, a sandwich, and you got paid at the end of the shift. And that day, I did both shifts, and I got that hot meal as well. Hadn't had one of those in a while, and I got paid. And that night, I had a place to live. Wow. And the next day, I had a job to go to. And I worked at the Cozy Tea Room from the time, at 15 and a half until I was about 21. And in that time, I worked 5 days a week, sometimes 6, and sometimes 7. And I did readings. Some days on it's really busy. Now, they weren't hour readings. They were 10-minute readings or 15-minute readings. I would see 40 people in a day, one after the other. Or some days I would see 10. But it was like that day in and day out. And I worked there till I was about 21. So that was, and that foundation, Kat, seeing those people, at the amount of people over and over and over again was going to university.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is on-the-job training, wide open.
Every day, absolutely.
That's just astounding.
Yeah. So when I was around 21, I left the tea room. Now, I was a bit of a problem child, I was a little temperamental, and I became, I was never the most popular there because there were other people. There was a guy named Red Hawk. His real name was Laurie Claus. His working name was Red Hawk, and he was the star of the city in those days. And at the tea room, they'd open the doors at 11:30, and we'd start readings at noon. at 11:30, people would come in, and the whole place was filled with people coming to get readings from Red Hawk. And by the time he got to work, he was booked up for the rest of the day. So a lot of us, and me in the earlier days, made our living on the people that Red Hawk couldn't do. And that was an interesting time. That could have been a comedy, a sitcom. It really could have been what went on in those days at the tea room. But when I left, it bothered me that Mrs. Cox was making more money on what we did than what we got, and that bothered me a lot. I didn't know very much about business in those days, but in those days, tea leaf and card readings were $2.50, and the tea room got, the reader got $1, and the tea room got $1.50. And in my mind, that just didn't seem right. That they would be making more money on my talent than I was, and that really bothered me a lot. And so that affected my relationship with her and hers with me. But because I was a hard worker and a good producer, I stayed there that long. When I left, I started out on my own. Yeah. So I was, anyway, 21.
Well, how did you do that?
What, start on my own?
Yeah.
Well, I was living at this place called Larry's Hideaway Hotel. It was a flea bag hotel right around Carlton and Jarvis and Toronto. Incidentally, just down the road from Maple Leaf Gardens. And I was working. I was working at the tea room, and I was able to pay my rent. Everybody knew me around there, and I was doing readings at the hotel in my room for a lot of the street people. And I thought that I was, popular enough that I could just, make it on my own. And so I quit at the tea room, or maybe I got fired. It happened, every few weeks I get fired or I quit, one or the other. It was one of those. And,
I can visualize that.
Oh yeah. But I always came back, and she always called me. And anyway, I quit for the final time. And within about 2 weeks, I had fallen behind in my rent. And the owner of the hotel was patient with me. And one time, and I was doing readings, I was getting $5 a reading instead of $1 when I got the readings. And one time, there was an older guy working on the front desk. He worked 4 nights a week. His name was Whitey, and Whitey died, not on the job, but at home. And when I heard that, I went to Art and I said, can I have Whitey's job, but I don't want to get paid. I would like to do it in exchange for room and board. And he said, okay. So that's how I started my practice. I was working 4 nights a week in exchange for room and board on the front desk, and also doing readings. That's how I was able to do it.
Well, that was very entrepreneurial of you.
Well, I had experience with the Orange Spot, working for in exchange. Right. And I worked not as a psychic, but from the time I was about 10, I always had a job after school. So I was used to working.
Well, I just think it's really a great step that you took, because it's really surprising, given your age when you were hitting the streets, that you were able to sustain yourself as well as you did. because adults have hard times with that. And a lot of times people are more caring or nurturing to children in those environments. But if you have if the other people, the adults in the room and, everyone else are in the same situation, that's not always shared. The caring and concern that they have. So I think that you are a very fortunate young man. And I think that the people that you worked with at the Cozy Tea Room were pretty awesome too.
They were. And I went back there after, several years after I'd worked there and saw everybody, and, I'd become pretty successful at that time. And I was, we had a really good connection when I went back, just like, for old time's sake. The reason I didn't ever get into trouble, the reason that I have the standard and values and morals that I have, honestly, the reason was I left home because I didn't feel I was worthy to have a home. And I felt that I had to prove that I was good, that I was worthy, that I was honest, that I was honorable. And if I worked at it, my parents would love me. That was why I did it and why I worked so hard.
I'm so sorry that was the reason. I'm glad that you survived it.
Thank goodness for the reason.
Well, yes.
Thank goodness for the reason. Yeah.
But I'm glad that you survived that, because the odds were probably not in your favor when you first began.
Probably
they rarely
not.
are for an adolescent.
Probably not. But I was pretty, still am. I was strong, and I still
You are
am.
strong.
Yeah, and I also got strong by being strong for others.
Yes.
By the way.
I can see that.
Yes.
That's who you are.
Yeah, that's what made me stronger.
Yeah.
And
it's amazing how when you spread that talent, it grows so fast and so strong.
Sure. So doing readings, which is what I've done, and life coaching. Now, I didn't just sort of get straightened out. I have to say, from about 16 all the way up until last February 2022, I had been in some type of therapy, inner healing, from that time up until last February. Last February, I graduated. I'm therapied out. I did it all. So it was also me working on me. And yes. I didn't have like one therapist. I had lots and lots. And it was me working on me. It wasn't just, it was me working on me to be better, stronger. That's what I worked on.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
When you hit that graduation point and it's kind of like, because I had no idea. I had no idea I had hit it. I felt kind of like turned out into the streets, right? But, it worked out. Yeah. But it is liberating because you feel that you have completed your whole.
Yes, that's right.
So, well, we are almost at the top of the hour, my friend.
How did that happen?
I have no idea. This has just gone way too fast. But we've got a whole nother one coming up. So I'm looking forward to that. But we are going to have to stop now for our top of the hour break. It is news. And I know that most people go, ugh, the news. But I personally feel that if we just look hard enough at any situation and environment, there is going to be positivity. Our job is to find it and to emphasize it. So let's do that. We're going to go for this news break, find the positive in the day, and come back for what is my favorite positive of the day with Robert Lyndsy Milne. I love having you as a guest. So we will be back, and chat says they love you too. So we'll catch y'all. Y'all come on back with us.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Officials in Florida are preparing for what's expected to be a major disaster ahead of what could be a major hurricane this week. NPR's Amy Held reports Tropical Storm Ian is getting stronger as it moves up the Caribbean.
All of Florida is under a state of emergency. Millions of residents told to prepare for what could be this week's arrival of a major hurricane. Many making store runs. So many, those seeking bottled water got disappointment at this Costco in Orlando.
We're out of water, folks, no water.
Other plans are disrupted in the area. NASA delayed a Tuesday launch of its moon rocket, and President Biden postponed his trip for a DNC rally. He did approve a disaster declaration freeing up federal resources if needed. Here's the National Hurricane Center's acting director, Jamie Rome.
Ian is going to be a large and powerful hurricane in the eastern Gulf of Mexico and spread its impacts over a large portion of the Florida peninsula.
Rome says people should finalize their hurricane preparations today. Amy Held, NPR News.
The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection is preparing for what's expected to be its final public hearing this week. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports lawmakers are wrapping up their months-long probe into the attack and could release an interim report of their findings before the upcoming midterm elections.
During Wednesday's hearing, lawmakers are expected to address some of the most pressing questions that remain unanswered. Committee member Zoe Lofgren says the panel will lay out additional information that could further demonstrate how then-President Donald Trump and his allies sought to overturn the 2020 election.
We have some additional information that will better inform the public as to the events leading up to and during the January 6th riot.
Lofgren tells NPR that lawmakers have not discussed whether the committee should make criminal referrals and most likely won't until the investigation is completed. Windsor Johnston, NPR News.
The Biden administration is moving forward with a controversial oil and gas lease sale off the coast of Alaska. NPR's Nathan Rott reports it's required under the recently passed climate bill.
The recently passed bill that makes record investments in renewable energy also requires the Interior Department to hold certain oil and gas lease sales, a provision that was unpopular with some environmental groups but critical to getting the law passed. Included in the list is the lease sale in Alaska's Cook Inlet, which has long been contested by conservation groups. The Biden administration had previously canceled the lease sale, citing a lack of industry interest, but the climate bill brought it back to life. And it's unclear now how much industry interest the sale will attract. Nathan Rott, NPR News.
And you're listening to NPR News. Actress Rita Gardner died of leukemia yesterday in a Manhattan hospital. Her friend and accompanist confirmed the death. She was 87 years old. As a soprano, Gardner made her mark as the original Louisa in The Fantastics, the longest-running off-Broadway show of all time. Jeff London reports.
The Brooklyn-born Gardner sang on the radio when she was 5 years old and made her theatrical debut in Jerry Herman's musical revue Nightcap. But she truly made a name for herself in the original cast of The Fantastics in 1960.
Just once before I'm old.
Gardner had a long career on and off Broadway, appearing in such shows as Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris, Steel Magnolias, and The Wedding Singer. She frequently performed in cabaret and was featured on TV in the various Law and Order series and as Grandma Fox in Dora the Explorer. For NPR News, I'm Jeff London in New York.
Typhoon Noru slammed into the main islands of the Philippines today with heavy rains and gusty winds and warnings of possible flooding. The Joint Typhoon Warning Center says the storm had maximum sustained winds of 149 miles an hour with wind gusts up to 183 miles an hour. About 20 storms and typhoons batter the Philippines each year. U.S. futures contracts are trading lower at this hour. Dow futures down 0.1%. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ futures contracts down 0.2%. I'm Janine Herbst, NPR News.
Welcome back for the second hour of Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate magazine. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, and this is a great show. I hope that you're enjoying it. If you missed any of the first segment, no worries, because you can find us anywhere that you get your streaming. We're on iHeart, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, which is India's version of iHeart, and they love us there. So, yeah, we love them too. I'm just so appreciative of all of our listeners. And tonight's guest, Robert Lyndsy Milne, is one of the best people I know, really, I think. He is a psychic. He is someone who has been a psychic his whole life. He has done work with different organizations, and I am so glad, Robert, that you are here with me tonight. Thank you for that.
And I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, you know, we have covered your youth and growing into being the man that you are. And I wanted to move on because you've done so much with your life. You've actually worked with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who were, I'm going to just go ahead and toss out, represented beautifully in the Queen's procession. And I was so glad that they chose.
Look great, beautiful, amazing, didn't they?
They were beautiful. I am a horse person, and I was loving that. But you've
they
worked
were
with
riding
them.
her. They were the riders and were riding the Queen's, Her Majesty's horses. Now, the RCMP or Canada gave those horses to Her Majesty as a gift, but the Mounties rode it in that procession. So
I didn't realize that. That makes it even more special.
Yeah. So there was a gift to the Queen, and they used those horses in the parade or in the procession.
Well, it was beautiful, and they were beautiful.
So the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, are Canada's national police force, and for a long time, the security service with the RCMP was the equivalent to the CIA, and it was Canada's equivalent. It was somewhere between the FBI and the CIA, and they were dealing with espionage and spies and things like that. So I was back in this happened. Oh, maybe you should say, have you ever done any work with the police? I'm just going into it.
Have you never done any work with the police?
Funny that you should mention that. By the way, I've been involved with finding lost people.
Yes.
I haven't been successful at finding living ones, but I have found several lost ones. But so back in the 70s, life was very different, and the psychic thing was just catching on. And I was the first Canadian psychic to appear on radio and TV shows and tour. And in the early days, there was no internet, of course. There was no networks. If you were going to do a show in Winnipeg, you had to be there. So I was auditioning for a show in Ottawa, which is Canada's capital. And I was, and I flew to Ottawa that day, to that morning, to do the show. I did the show, and by the way, I got the part, and I came home the same day. So a couple of days later, and incidentally, the way you got the show was you auditioned, and the audition was on the air, right? That's so. a couple of days later, I got a phone call from the program director, or it was the news director, and he said, "This guy, he's a spy, ha ha ha." Called. His name was Eva. Now this happened in the 70s, so the files are buried. So, and he was joking, saying, this guy is a spy, and he's with the KGB, and his name was Ivan. But we'll do. It was anyway, and the news director said he also worked for TASS News Agency as a journalist, but he also has a passport, a passport from the he had, what is it when you have a
diplomatic immunity?
No, a passport for you work for the not the immigration, the I can't believe my brain just froze on this.
Okay.
A diplomatic passport.
Okay.
He had a diplomatic passport, but he was a journalist, right? Journalists don't have diplomatic passports. So it was assumed he was a spy, and it was a joke but he wanted to get in touch with me. And the news director said, "Was it okay?" And I said, "No, it's not.
Okay.
I don't want to know him. I don't want anything to do with him. I just leave me alone." And a couple of days later, I started getting phone calls from friends saying, "Robert, we get this phone call from this guy from the Mounties asking questions about you." And I'm thinking, oh my God, right? And then about a week later, I get a call directly, and the guy says, "Hello, Mr. Milne, this is Sergeant, etc., from the RCMP. Myself and my partner would like to come and discuss a non-criminal matter with you." And I said, "Is it about the guy from Ottawa?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I don't want to be involved. Leave me alone." And he said, "Would you please just talk with us? It's something very important, and you could be doing a service for your country."
Oh, wow. Well, how can you turn that down?
And I said, I was like 26 or 5 or something like that. And I said, okay. And him and his partner, he said, my partner has to fly in from Ottawa. And this guy was in charge of the Niagara Falls station for this RCMP, the security service. But in those days, in the 1970s, during the Cold War, there was more intelligence passed across the United States-American border than anywhere in the world, by the way. So this sergeant, was in charge of the Niagara Falls division. So he had to arrange for the guy from Ottawa, and they came to my office. And they did a couple of tests with me about being psychic. And one of the things I said to them was, I know they gave me the name of the guy. I knew who he was. And I said, but there's another guy whose name is Blitnikov. And they both turned white and looked at each other, and then looked back at me, and they said, "There's no way you could have known that." Except
psychic.
Yeah. And they started getting serious. So they told me the story about this guy, Ivan. And the story was he had spent most of his career, his adult life, in Washington, D.C. as a journalist with diplomatic passport. This was coming to the end of the Brezhnev era, and Brezhnev was losing power. And this guy, Yvonne, got transferred from Washington to Ottawa. That is not a promotion. That is like a big league embarrassment and a demotion. He thought that he got moved there because of the Russian premier was losing power, and they thought him reaching out might be a reaching out so that he could defect.
Okay.
And if he was going to defect, it would be a big time score because of how high up he was. So we agreed, and I said, so how do I do it? And he said, when's your next show? And I told him, and he said, okay, well, we'll take care of the rest. And he said, tell us what date. And I, had it set. And these guys on the day that I was going to Ottawa to meet him, I spoke to him on the phone too, by the way, told him where I was going to be. The Mounties set up that hotel in my room. I told him where I was going to be. And the Mounties came and picked me up at my place, and we drove to the airport. We flew to Ottawa on a government plane. It wasn't a long flight. It was more like an army plane, or it wasn't like the fancy jets.
Wasn't the premiers?
No, it certainly wasn't. Anyway, so we get to the hotel. We didn't even check in, and we get upstairs. So 1970s. We get upstairs, and there's my room, and then there's one room on either side, and there were like 8 guys in, 4 guys in each room adjoining my room, and the room that I was in was wired. So this guy, Yvonne, we have a time. And, oh, by the way, and this is the only time I've ever done this. The Mounties sat me down and showed me this guy's dossier, all the information about him that they had on him, just to prepare me so that I couldn't screw up the reading. But then they said, after you say all these things, this is what we need to do. He said, you need to say, and I think it was something like, sometimes we get into trouble, and sometimes we discover that we have friends and we didn't know they were. Something like that. And that's what I had to say. So as this guy comes in to get his reading, he sits down, I start to do his reading. In my shock, the information that was in his file was wrong. So I just erased everything that I could remember from it, and then I just did my regular reading. And I had him, he was really interested, and I was legitimately doing that reading. And then I said the magic words that I was supposed to say.
Yes.
And he stood up, turned around, and walked straight out just walked away. Didn't say goodbye, nothing. Just got up and walked away.
Oh my
By the way, I never heard from him again. So anyway, the guys come in. I thought that I screwed it up, and I thought I blew it. And then they said, no. We should have told you, but anytime you mention defecting to the Russians, what they do is they get up and get out of the way. They just turn around and walk away. That's what they do. It's standard. We should have told you. So, and I said, so are we ever going to know? And they told me no, probably not. So
how odd.
Wait now, a couple of weeks later, the guy from Niagara Falls calls me and says, that was great work you did. Is there anything else? Could you do anything else? And I said, well, what do you have in mind? And he said, well, we look for dead letterboxes down here in Niagara. And I said, what's a dead letterbox? He said, where a dead letterbox is where they pass intelligence.
Yes.
And he wanted to know if I could find dead letterboxes. So a couple of days later, I didn't have a car then, so I took the bus down to Niagara Falls, and they met me. We went to the head office, the station, the bureau, and I looked at maps of the park. And, I put my hand over the maps. I'd never done any of this before. I just put my hand over the maps and sensed the energy. And I said, I think this one here, this one, this one, this one. So then we went out into the park and found them. We found them. And then that night we went out and partied. What a wild night. So anyway, then they poured me on.
Wait, we have to take a break. But
Already?
I hate breaks, but we'll be right back. Y'all come back with us, because this is rocking.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Paratalk Radio is your one-stop for all things paranormal, the unknown, and the supernatural. Join us every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central for discussions and guests on topics such as ghosts, hauntings, Bigfoot, UFOs, and more. This broadcast is rated M for mature and intended for listeners over 16 on paratalkradio.com.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
The time is 23 minutes after the hour. Welcome back. I am so glad you are here. I am Kat Hobson. You're listening to Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine, and my guest, Robert Lyndsy Milne. And he was just educating us with some of the things that he has done with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Security service, yeah.
Yeah, this is amazing.
So I went down to Niagara Falls once a month for about a year and a half and found many dead letterboxes and a bunch of other things. And one day we were going through the park and my contact, he looked at me and he said, "Remember your Russian friend?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I remember." And he just said, "It turned out good."
Ah, good.
But I never heard anything else. So I don't know what that meant, but he said it turned out well. So
I would guess that means he came out.
I guess. So that's one of the things. But every month and we would find things, and I would even do some work on cases that they were working on and stuff like that. I've also, found dead people, or, people that have been murdered or lost and killed, and, stuff like that. I've done that.
I found it interesting, though, that you said that you did not have great success with finding the living. Why do you think that was?
Well, several times I was approached by the police. Now, I just want you to know that I do not reach out and volunteer to do this. In fact, most of the time, somebody has to hold me down and the other has to twist my arm until it's going to rip out of my shoulder before I'll do it. And when I get involved, I have to be guaranteed that nobody knows a psychic's been involved, especially the family.
Right.
And I want them never to reveal my name, because I don't want to do that for my living. And
I could see that.
The first time it happened, it was in I was driving a Fiat X19. Okay, so I had it in very, very early 1980s. I was in a small town in Ontario. I was did a radio show and then doing readings at the hotel. Late at night, during my last reading, there was a knock on the door. No, it happened in late afternoon. And knock on my door, and there are these two cops. And they wanted to talk to me. Now, back in those days, doing readings was against the law in Canada.
Really?
But yeah, the cops came by, and there had been a woman that disappeared. And she was in the city Barrie, but we had heard about it in Toronto of her missing. So the police they just exhausted every lead. They just couldn't find her. And this woman, by the way, was a really upstanding woman. She had one child, and she was either a librarian or a teacher. And she had a day off, and she was going to get her hair done, and she took her child to the daycare people, and she drove to the mall and parked right outside her hairstylist. But she never got there. Her car was still found outside, and she was nowhere to be seen. She didn't pick up her child. She just disappeared. So by the time that I got to it, it was pretty much assumed that she was dead. And there was a lot of pressure. Anyway, these cops knocked, and they said that they wanted me to help them. And I said, I put up, I resisted. And they said, if you want to do any more readings in this town, you have to help us.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay, I needed the money, right? I really needed the bread that week. So I said, okay, I finish at 8:30. So I'll be ready at 9. And they come to see me, and they're not taking me very seriously, but they were desperate. And they took me down to the police station, and we started looking at maps, and I said to them, by the way, gentlemen, so this would have been, say, October. I said to them, by the way, gentlemen, you're not going to find this woman until next spring, but I can help you. So we look at the maps, and I show them, put my hand over the maps and stuff, and I say, by the way, this looks pretty good right here, but there should be a used or an abandoned train trestle, bridge over train trestle that's not used anymore. And on the trestle, you'll see 1910. And they just looked at me and laughed. So that night, after looking in the park, now it's 11:30, 12 o'clock, we go out in the rural area where I think that she's going to be. And we walk through the area in the middle of the night, traipsing around, and we didn't find anything. And, they were looking at me thinking, this guy's a fraud. And then we went back a different way. And as we were driving down this dirt road, there was a train trestle, and there it said 1910. And then they kind of got serious. And the next day they sent out a search party, but they didn't find her. But several months later, I got a call from one of the detectives, and he told me that they had found her, and very much in the area that I had mentioned. So that was the first time I did it. But any other time I've done it, it was forced.
I have other friends who have done that kind of work.
Yes.
And I find it interesting. When you were doing that, I know that you were utilizing maps and such. Do you experience what the person that you're looking for experienced? Like one of my acquaintances sees things through the missing person's eyes. Another one sees things through the person who took them's eyes.
Wow.
So do you do anything like that? Or do you utilize the maps in the area more so?
Well, I don't even look at the maps. What I do is put my hand over the maps, and I feel the energy from the map, and then we go to that location. There was a time where there was a famous murder where a woman claimed that her car was carjacked by a black man, and her 2 children were in the back. And it was I think it was South Carolina. It might have been North. At the time, I had this friend, her name will come to me in a minute, Mary Garcia. Her name will come to me. She was a news reporter, and then she was on the first news magazine show. I think it was Inside Edition, and she was the traveling reporter. So we were good friends. I knew her in Toronto, and I knew her when she was in New York, and then she had this job. So I had been on tour for about 2 weeks, and I had just gotten home this one Saturday night, and Mary called me at home, and I was really tired, and she said, "So have you heard about the woman whose car got carjacked with her children inside?" And this was making like world news. And I said, "Well, I kind of heard a little bit about it, but yeah." And she said, "Well, she was on the job there." And she said, could I pick up anything about it?" And Mary Garfello was her name. And I said, "Mary, I just got home. Can you give me an hour to think about it? And then I'll, then get back to me." And I said, "By the way, what do you think is going on? Just curious." And Mary said, "I really believe her." By the way, Mary is a Canadian too. And she said, "I believe the woman." And I said, "Great." I had, I had done 100 readings and maybe a little bit more in that 2 weeks, and I was really tired. And I thought about it for a while. Mary called back, and I said to her, "Well, Mary, we're going to find out who's right. The roving reporter or the wild Canuck psychic. We're going to find out who's right, because I see things very differently." And I said, the children are in the car.
Yep.
And they're within a 5-mile radius, and the car is underwater.
I remember that case, but go ahead. I'm familiar with that case.
And Mary went silent, And then she said, wait a minute. I'm going to talk to the national editor. And she called me back like a half an hour later, and she said, okay, it's all set up. We're going to be flying you down to South Carolina or whatever, right, tonight, and you're going to appear on the show doing capsule comments. So, the crazy Canuck psychic doing capsule comments on the news until we find her. And I said, what psychic are you talking about? Because it's sure as hell not me. And she was kind of shocked, but I wouldn't go there, and I wouldn't participate anymore. I saw the babies in the car.
Yeah.
Oh, and they were in their harnesses.
She left them in their car seats.
Just left them. And anyway, later, Mary called and asked me, why wouldn't I do it? Oh, but never mind that part. So she went to the police chief of the town, and she said, I have it on good source that the children are in the car underwater, 5-mile radius. And they found them. And at the time, just before the police chief got that information, she was being believed as the darling who had been, her babies were stolen from her, and they were starting to suspect.
Yes.
And when Mary came up with that information, the whole case changed. Now, I didn't want to do it for a lot of reasons. And number one is it would have changed my life. And I would have been called around the world to help find somebody. And from a practical point of view, like the business side, sitting behind my desk, I said to myself, okay, I'm going to get inundated with calls of people. How much does it cost to find a lost child? What happens if 1,000 people call me? How much would I charge? And how would I decide? I have to make a living. I have to do readings. How much does it cost? And if I say 1,000 people, I'll never be able to do all them, so I'll have to narrow it down. So charge $1,000. Yeah. How do you choose? And then I also realized most of the people that I'd be looking for would be dead. And I don't want to tell a mother or father the child's dead.
Yes. I can absolutely understand that.
And that what my life would have become because of all that publicity. So I just wouldn't have anything to do with it. And I was really happy to stay in the background.
I can understand that.
That's one of the reasons. That's one of the reasons why I've forgotten so much of my stuff, because it was I deliberately chose not to talk about it or share it. That's one of the things that, and I'm just, all these things have been starting to come back since my return from leaving semi-retirement back into in the saddle full time again.
Well, I tell you, it's I cannot imagine being someone who had to make those decisions.
Yeah, well, I wasn't gonna.
Yeah, I'm glad that you opted to not do that, because we had a missing child here, and another Canadian psychic who came on my show with me before I really knew very much about him But on my show, he was talking about that case, and I guess he didn't know where I was from, but he was talking about the mother and, all this other
Same
stuff.
one as I was?
No.
Oh, okay.
Somebody who had been missing from Birmingham at that time.
Oh, okay.
And I was just like, because I'm not that person. I'm not going to go and be able, or I haven't tried. I probably could if I tried, but I don't want to know these things. And I can't fathom this man was actually on my show not being truthful about a case that he didn't realize that I knew something about.
Wow.
To self-aggrandize. And I was just like, nope, done. Boop. And, I didn't cut the show. I probably should have. But I was still new at that time.
Did you broadcast it?
It was broadcast. But
okay.
Unfortunately, a lot of my shows, one of my producers decided to, not do it anymore. I've had that happen. 2 different channels quit.
Really?
But in that instance, she pulled down everything. So I don't have all of my show files from that period. Some of them are still around, like SoundCloud and stuff. But one of my computers that I had them downloaded on died. And so, it's okay. I've done this for 8 years. There's still plenty out there, but I would have liked to have had that show because I did have, he was not telling the truth. So that's something that you have to be aware of too, because it's real easy if somebody is a proven and good psychic for something of that scenario to go to the ego, I think. And I don't really even know if he actually spoke with that mother, but I would say probably not. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Many times when psychics get involved, they volunteer.
Yes.
And I don't do that kind of crap.
Well, this was
actually I don't even do that with readings either.
Yeah. Well, I was taken aback because, like I said, he didn't do his homework on who he was being interviewed by, didn't even know where I was, and so didn't know that case was something that
without saying it,
a local child.
Without saying the name, do you remember the name?
I do. Yes.
Maybe. How about telling me after the show?
I will tell you, but not on the air. Yeah.
That's what I said after the show.
I will share that with you.
Great.
But I actually came across him at a public event that we were both at. And the intuition was spot on. So,
of course.
But we have to take our last break.
Another one? Well, I'm just getting warmed
I
up.
know, and it's the last one. You were so, we've got to do this more often because we could do this every week.
Yeah.
And never run out of conversation. But I do want to touch base, though, on your work with this disease. So when we come back, I'd like to touch that, if you don't mind.
Okay. Be glad to.
Okay. So, this is our final break. If you've got questions, get them to me. And if you're where you are having trouble with that, you can just message me on Facebook, and my phone number is right up there on the Fate Mag page. You can send me a message, but we'll be back right after this. Y'all come back too.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... nope. That'll do. Hello, I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back for the final segment of Fate Mag Radio, the online voice of Fate Magazine, and I'm going to just take a minute here to say, if you haven't been to the website, you gotta go, because we have new editions of Fate Magazine in publication since 1948, and we have merch that you can get, and you can communicate with any of us. If you have something that you'd like to see covered on the show, please do reach out to me, Kat at fatemagradio.com. We're always open to ideas, and we love our listeners and readers. So check it out, fatemag.com. Now, Robert, I would like to touch base with you. I said it before we went to the break about your work that's covered in the book, The Predator. Oh, where did it go?
Perfect Predator.
The Perfect Predator. Yes, because that's really very timely. And you're actually quoted 24 times in this book.
Yes. And the book is a scientist book written by a scientist, so an epidemiologist. So the way the story goes is a Perfect Predator. The way the story goes is I have this client that she's been my client 30 plus years. And I can tell you her name because she's the one who wrote the book. And her name is Stephanie Strathdee, and she has a PhD in epidemiology. And the very first reading I did for her was when she had just graduated, just completed her doctorate degree. Currently, Stephanie is a professor at the University of California. She is assistant or deputy what are they called? The head of the department in universities are called the deputy. What's the department head at a university? It's in the department. Anyway, she's the number 2 person in that, and she's famous around the world for her works. Her husband, Tom Patterson, I can tell you about him because he helped write the book, and this is about Tom as well. And Tom also has a PhD, but his is in experimental psychology, and then he has a PhD in psychiatry, and he also is assistant. That's what happens sometimes. My brain freezes. The word will come to me in a minute. Anyway, he's a deputy of the deputy head of the psychology department at the University of California. Stephanie and Tom are going to go away for their, a dream vacation. A year before their vacation, I do a reading for Tom, and Tom is, magnificent man. He's like 6'5", and he's like big. And over the years, Tom got real big and over 300 pounds. So I was doing a reading for him, and I said to him, by the way, in 2 years from now, you're going to be more than 100 pounds. You're going to lose more than 100 pounds. And I talked about that for a while. And then I came back to the present and I said, but before that happens, by the way, you're going to get so sick, you won't be able to get sicker and stay alive. However, you will stay alive and you're going to lose 100 pounds. And then I said to him, it seems to me the destiny is about losing the 100 pounds. So I think that if what I've said to you frightens you and you get serious and you could lose 100 pounds on your own, you could do that, or you could do it the hard way and get sick and lose 100 pounds. And then I said, Tom, it's up to you. You can do it the easy way, you can do it the hard way. All right, so a year later, Tom and Stephanie go away on this dream vacation. It's like December of that year, first week of December or something like that. And they go to Egypt to tour the pyramids. Anyway, a couple of days into their tour, Tom but he's been sick anyway, and he was having the problems with his stomach back then when I was getting in the morning. Right. So anyway, Tom and Stephanie are touring the pyramids, and inside one of the pyramids, Tom gets sick and passes out. He gets carried out of the pyramid and then to the hotel, and then the doctor comes, and the doctor takes him, sends him to the hospital. And while he's in the hospital in Cairo, he catches the most potent superbug on the planet, and it was 100% antibiotic resistant. And what that means, if you get it, you die.
Yep.
There was no cure. So Tom comes down with that. He then gets medevac to Germany, to a special clinic in Germany, and then Stephanie goes with him. So this is where I come in the story. Stephanie contacts me. Now, I'm used to talking with them all the time. And now we're, just the week before Christmas when this is starting to happen. And I was so sick that Christmas. I just could barely get out of bed. And I could hear my Skype phone ringing, and I wasn't going to answer it anyway. I crawled to the, my computer and answered it. And I'd been thinking about Tom and Stephanie over those days anyway. They'd been on my mind. And then as soon as I saw and I answered and this is in the book, by the way, first thing I said to her was, what took you so long? I've been waiting to hear from you. And then she told me what was going on with Tom. And I said to her that he's not going to die, and that there'll be, anyway, Tom was in a coma for 8 months. He went into septic shock 7 times. He was in isolation, and his doctors and nurses and the cleaning staff all wore hazmat suits around him. Early on, I told Stephanie that she could find a cure. This is in the book too. Yes. And I told her that she could find a cure. And I formed a mental link with Tom. And in that link, I knew what was going on with him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I knew when he was okay. I knew when he was weak. I knew when he was letting go. I knew he was in crisis. I knew when his vital signs changed. Now, I'm not a doctor, or I have no medical training, but I could sense and see the things that were going on with him. As time wore on, and by the way, I had a meeting with this genius epidemiologist, Stephanie, who decided that she was going to find a cure for her husband's disease. And by the way, she did. She formed a group of the most brilliant minds and scientists on the planet. And Stephanie leading that group, and they had a psychic and a healer from Carlsbad, California. Martin was his name. So Martin is his name. Anyway, so Stephanie forms this group, and then I was giving her information. There was one time with Tom where, how I knew that he was, how his health was, or how his spirits were, I visualized a candle and lit. And when the flame was strong, I knew that he was okay. If the flame started to flicker, I knew that there was problems. And this one day I saw the flame looked like it was going to go out. It was relatively early. They were still in Germany. And I said to Stephanie, and he was in crises, and they, with the and the doctors were seeing all this, they didn't know what was happening. And I said to Stephanie, I said, Tom needs to see his daughters. He's cold. He's alone. He doesn't know where he is. He's sick, and he can hear what they're saying. And they're saying around him that he's dying and stuff. And he's letting go. And I said, Tom needs to see his children. Now I said, yesterday would have been a good day. Today's a good day. Tomorrow's not so good. And if you wait longer, don't bother. That night, I was it was his life. And that night, the girls showed up. And I had been pacing the floors, worrying, because I could feel him getting weaker and weaker. And then all of a sudden, the candlelight came on again. And the girls had arrived. And Tom talks about that in the book. Anyway, over that time with Stephanie's group, and one of the things that happened for me that had never happened before, I've always been afraid of making a mistake. I've always been afraid, and I still am. I've always been afraid of giving somebody the wrong advice or the wrong information. I have been petrified. So because of that, I've never really just let it all hang out. And I told Stephanie earlier on in the process, I said, Stephanie, I'm afraid I'm going to tell you something that could hurt Tom. And Stephanie said, Robert, you don't understand. You're not the only one involved. There is a whole group of people that are involved. Each one is a specialist in their area. And it's your duty to tell me exactly what you feel with no holds barred, so that I can hear what you say and what they're saying, and then I can make up my mind. It's my decision, not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to give me what you know.
Yes.
And that was the first time in my life I let it all hang out. And it was the greatest learning experience of my life. I stretched my awareness beyond anything I ever imagined I could do. Anyway, they helped, and I helped her make the choice of the cure. They found the cure. He was about 8 hours from death, and he was injected with the new with the substance that Stephanie came up with, and they didn't know whether it was going to kill him or not. But he had been in a coma for 8 months and going through the septic shock, and he was going to die anyway. So they hit him with some phages, IV, and his vital signs were a little bit stronger. So a couple hours later, they zapped him again. His vital signs got stronger and stronger, and he got zapped throughout the night. The next morning, Stephanie went to visit him, and he had been in a coma. He'd been hit with these injections of the phages, which is what cured him. He had been in this coma, and he'd had about 8 injections throughout the night. When Stephanie got there and she touched Tom's hand, he opened his eyes and looked at her. He came out of his coma and looked at her in the eyes, and then he fell asleep. But he didn't go back in the coma, and he never went back in the coma again. And over time, the superbug was defeated. And no longer is that superbug a guaranteed death. Now there's a cure, and it's phages.
That's just beautiful and astounding. Yes. I'm so glad that you shared that. And the book is called The Perfect Predator.
Yes, I mentioned 24 times. And but I'm not the main event of the story. When you read it, I remember when I saw the final edition before it went to press, I was thinking, when I read it, I thought, if I didn't know the story, I wouldn't believe this. And I don't mean my part. I mean the miracle that occurred then, the cure to that disease, because hundreds of people around the world have been cured by using that technique. maybe thousands by now, because it's been 6 years.
That is astounding, beautiful, and what a gift to be part of that.
Privilege of my lifetime.
I tell you. Well, we are at the end of the show, Robert. I'm so glad that we shared that, because I think that was so important. And everything you do is important. I love your work. I love your show, which is My Side of the Crystal Ball. And you can find him on all the popular platforms, including iHeartRadio. Including.
Right.
And, you know,
you can also find me on my website.
Yes.
RobertLyndsyMilne.com as well. If you're interested in reading or something, I still do them.
And you can book there on the website.
Yep. I take care of all. No, you contact me, and I'm still doing that. I'm getting at the point where I'm having trouble keeping up with doing that part, but I'm still, connecting with people before, doing everything. Or I guess I'm the chief cook and bottle washer. By the way, what do psychics do when they're at home and nobody knows? We put the garbage out, rake the leaves, wash dishes. That's what we do.
Walk the dogs.
Walks the dog, yeah.
Well, you also have a wonderful blog on your website, so people should check that out as well.
Yeah, and on my podcast, we have a WWRS, What Would Robert Say, where I talk about a thought, an idea, a way of thinking, things like that. WWRS on My Side of the Crystal Ball. Well,
thank you so much for being here. We are going to do this again soon, because it's been a little while, so we need to be doing this more often. But I appreciate you, and I always enjoy you.
Thank you, Kat. I care about you too.
So for all our listeners, thank you so much. I know we are a bit over, but well worth it. I bet you agree. And we will be back next week. Same time, same Cat channel. And don't forget, Paranormal Experienced will be airing Wednesday night. So join me there. Take care, be blessed, and have a fantastic week. Thank you for joining us. Good night. Oh, before we go, I got to do it. If you don't like the world that you're looking at, what happens? You change it. Be the person that you wish you had for a friend. Be the parent you wish you had, or the child. Just be the best you can be, and just take that out there. Spread that love around. There's a reason that we have it. So be the change. You can do it. We all have that within us to manifest the kind of environment that we want to live in. So go do it. Now take care. Good night.